the IAEA cooperation is shut down. So that's a big move. But also there have been reports, hard to verify them. The national interest is one of the few that is sharing that Iran is going to potentially purchase 40 plus even. I've seen this number, J-10Cs and other Chinese aircraft to bolster their air power. And there's been a lot of talk about the fact that Russia and Iran, that there was delays with air defense systems to Iran, that Iran disagreed with terms. I'm curious on what your thoughts on the next steps for Iran. What are your reaction to these reports, and how does it conform to, the next phase of this conflict?
Okay, so I haven't seen the actual national interest story before now, but I've heard these reports on social media, and I looked at them, and there's certainly a possibility they're true. Yeah, I don't see any better sources here in the national interest story either.
Yeah,
I have, it's possible, right? But it's also possible that this is pure disinformation for whatever purposes. I can't verify this. I have no evidence of this. The J-10 is a good aircraft, but so is the Su-35. So now, with regards to Russia's delays with air defense, okay, so it's quite obvious that we have statements from Putin a couple weeks ago at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum talking about, while this conflict was raging, how difficult it was to be a friend to and help Iran. Because despite the strategic partnership that Iran and Russia agreed to last year, the new deepened, strengthened strategic partnership, which, by the way, the Iranian parliament only approved finally after Israel had begun their attacks. But it includes no defense clauses, right? At Iran's refusal, right? Which is a shock, because most of us assumed that Russia was already beginning the process of building an air defense network for Iran, and that's not the case at all. And he went in further that Russia had offered Iran a mutual defense pact, like with what they signed with North Korea, and Iran said, thank you, but no thank you. And that Russia had also offered coordination on air defense, right? A joint air defense production so that air defense interceptors would even be made as well in Iran, and that Russia would help them build a multi-layered integrated air defense and EW network, and that they would even be hooked up into Russia's own satellite and radar air defense, warning system. And they said, no, thanks, but no thanks. And apparently the reason for this, what we're being told, and I haven't seen it denied by the Iranians at all, is that this was because the Iranian government, again, supposedly, and it makes a degree of sense, Pezeshkian, right, the so-called reformist who ran on a campaign naive as F of placating and improving relations with the West, so that makes a certain amount of sense, that they believed that militarily aligning themselves with Russia, well, Russia was already in a proxy come direct war with the US and NATO in Ukraine, would ruin any chances of Iran improving relations with the West. And get this, might even lead to direct conflict between Iran and the United States. So, I'm sorry, Picard epic double facepalm, right? That's the only reaction. Now, Iran is a prickly nation, all right? They've got a millennia of history, right, behind them as a civilization. That they've got their pride, their sovereignty. And, there's some bad history between Russia and Iran, whether that was the Romanov Empire and the Persian Empire, or even in World War II when the Soviet Union and Britain invaded Iran under fears that Iran would side with the Axis powers. And that was brief. What's more is that there had been a previous agreement around a little bit before and around 2010, say, for Russia to deliver their S-300 air defense system to Iran. A little older, but very formidable still, right? Ukraine was using them to great effect in the beginning year or two of the conflict there until Russia finally got rid of them all. But Russia was going through their own naive phase of believing they could cut a deal, right? That they could ingratiate themselves with the West. This was when Medvedev was president. That was when when Medvedev agreed to the UN Security Council resolution that opened the way for, at least in their minds, for the West to dismember Libya, turning it into the failed terrorist state that it is today. But they withheld on the deliveries of these S-100s for years, right? For years before they were finally delivered. And that was out of an attempt to please the U.S. So Iran has, some reasons to distrust Russia, but it must be said that both Russia and China have come a long way in the last decade, since 2015, say, to where they are today. And I think it's obvious to us, right, in the alt media community, that Russia and China and Iran they will either hang and survive together, or they will be hung separately. Right? That's it. That's the options. The U.S. Sees a closing window, geopolitical window of opportunity. They wanted to take down Russia first in Ukraine. That the Biden administration, that failed. Now they just made an attempt to take down Iran. This, shall we say, prioritization and strategic sequencing. Right. The end game, of course, is to go for China, but they tried to separate China by taking out Russia, and then when that didn't work, Iran next. All U.S. presidents since Obama have been trying to pivot to Asia to confront China, but they've all gotten bogged down, every single one of them, in either the Middle East or now Eastern Europe with Ukraine and Russia as well. So I really hope that in the aftermath of this, we saw this emergency trip of Aragchi to Moscow. He didn't go to Beijing. He went to Moscow. And the Russians, they didn't, there was no transcript, no readout of what happened, but we did have Peskov saying, how can you help the Iranians? What will you do? And his response was, well, that depends on what they ask for, which seemed a fairly expansive. It wasn't quite, we'll give them whatever they want, but there are some people that are, interpreting that way. Maybe it was, we don't know. But I believe that the Russian government, after the last 5 years, last 10 years, understands that you can't cut deals with the West. You can go through motions, but you can't ever trust them. And hopefully Iran has reached that. But they also need to learn to trust Russia and China. I think that this will become easier if everything is presented as a tripartite, right? Everything is done together. It's not just Iran has to come to an agreement with Russia and depend on and trust Russia, or depend on and trust China, but it all has to be done, the three of them together, right? Mutual defense agreements, strategic agreements, whatever it takes. because, again, they'll either hang together and survive to found the multipolar world order, or they won't. And we'll have another century of US-led Western global hegemony. That's the game. That is it. And in every other country, North Korea, Syria's gone now. They're bit players on the scene for various, resources, capability, foundations of geopolitical strategy reasons or political will. It comes down to these three, and they're all quite clearly targeted as adversaries by the United States. And we had statements from Kellogg, former General Kellogg, who is Trump's really babysitter for the Kiev regime during already collapsed diplomatic talks on trying to close out the Ukraine conflict on U.S. terms. But Kellogg warned that there was a new geopolitical reality, and that's why the Trump administration was at least trying to consider, not obviously succeeding, but trying to adopt a more realist-based foreign policy viewpoint. Because whereas previously they could deal with Russia and China and Iran separately, that now they were all interconnected together to some ways, and they were working with each other, not to the degree that they need to, right? This needs to be strengthened. But I mean, one of the clear examples of is the U.S. goes after Iran, right? And right away, oil prices started raising. Donald Trump is freaking out and screaming at, I don't know, the market, someone, I'm watching you. You're playing into the hands of the enemy for oil prices rising. And then, it was a few days after that they tapped out of the conflict. Meanwhile, the prices of energy go up and Russia starts, we're in the money, right? The war coffers are full, keep it up. So you go after one of the tripartite, and that has negative effects that exposes the U.S. to vulnerabilities with the other two. They need to strengthen this. They need to trust each other. They need to find ways to trust each other. And the military defense between the three of them, the intelligence defense, the intelligence cooperation, and other degrees of cooperation. I could certainly say that both the Iranian media and the Chinese media could probably take some cooperation with RT and Sputnik under consideration. I mean, supposedly there are already programs of cooperation, but they don't go far enough because, I mean, RT, I got my own issues, right? They've got their petty internal politics and warts and all, but no one can deny how effective they've been in total. Right. I mean, the U.S. screams about their effects in Africa and South America and how they're turning the world against them all the time. So that's certainly another degree of cooperation. But it's got to deepen. It's got to strengthen. It's got to become more than just tactical maneuvers. It's got to become deeply institutionally rooted reality. The alliance between Russia and China, Iran. They need to stop getting over this aversion to that terminology, that way of thinking. A long time we've heard, SCO, BRICS. We're not a geopolitical bloc. We're against that type of thinking. Well, you may not have any interest in geopolitical blocs, but meanwhile, the opposing geopolitical bloc, U.S.-led Western global hegemony, they have an interest in you. And you have to either hang together or you'll fall separately.
Yeah, and it's quite ironic, actually, that a lot of the reports about Iran potentially bolstering its air power, not necessarily air defenses, with the Chinese aircraft was going on as the defense ministers of the SCO were meeting together. So that message hopefully is starting to make the rounds. But also, Mark, I'm curious about your reaction to some have been surmising that a big reason why Iran was able to have such success with its missile targeting was that it's able to use Chinese GPS, Baidu, for targeting. And this, what is your reaction to this? Your knowledge of these kinds of systems and how it could maybe spell an indication that further cooperation would indeed be a benefit rather than a hindrance, which these three powers often see the alliance kind of fold as being potentially a hindrance to them.
Yeah, I mean, both China's own satellite networks, which are growing in capabilities almost monthly, and Russia's own GLONASS system are extremely capable. And my understanding is that they themselves are increasingly actively sharing and coordinating information, Russia and China, constantly, so that, you know, it's difficult even to consider them separate, you know, capabilities at this point, because there's so much intelligence sharing going on between the two of them. And either one of them can account for what we're hearing now about Israeli laments about how precise at least some of the Iranian strikes with their newer weapons were. And, you know, space is just another battlefield now, right? You know, we often think of space only in terms of science fiction and laser guns and that, but satellites, anti-satellite capabilities, I mean, that's the real game right now. Not even so much, you know, kinetic things, weapons, rods from gods, and that sort of things. It's all about satellites and anti-satellite weapons. It's a real thing, and Iran obviously needs help in this category, and that's certainly one of the things that they can't easily get on their own, not in any type of time frame that matters. So we know during the conflict, during this 12-day war, as Trump is calling it, I think it more of as a skirmish, kicking the can down the road till the next outbreak of the conflict. But that Putin and Xi Jinping had an hour and a half phone conversation that they made clear was almost entirely talking about the conflict in the war on Iran. We don't know what they said. We don't know what they agreed to. We don't know what any type of division of duties and labor in assisting Iran might have come down, right? This talk now about the J-10, again, I consider it all rumors. Regardless, whether Iran took the J-10 or whether the Iran takes the Su-35, I don't care as long as they take one of them. But actually, I think they need to worry far more about air defense, right? As we're talking about, you know, what that they're getting. They need to talk. They need more intelligence sharing. They need counterintelligence help from Russia and China. They need digital sovereignty, right? They need to get rid of all Western social media networks, or at least put them under much tighter observation and control. They need to get rid of any Western software, hardware in terms of computer systems in their government and military, something that Russia and China have already done to a great degree. They need real digital and electronic sovereignty. And that's something, again, that Russia and China can help them with, because they've only recently come through and struggled through that on their own. And Iran, you know, needs to learn to take help on all of these categories. I would consider counterintelligence and air defense, you know, the top priorities. But I would be surprised, to revisit your actual question, if they did not get satellite targeting data from either China or Russia or both.
Can you run down the specifics of Iran's obligations under, I don't know about a defense pact, but maybe we're talking about strategic partnership, but they're wondering if support for the resistance, was Putin okay with this? I've never seen any reports on this, but your thoughts and analysis.
Yeah, we don't know because no text of the strategic partnership has ever been included. I know a lot of people are online saying, "Oh, Iran only refused because they would have been forced to send troops to fight the Ukrainians or something," which is just absolutely nonsense, right? Even that did not happen with North Korea, right? Russia made no demands that North Korea send troops to fight in Kursk or anywhere else. The North Koreans eagerly volunteered for that because they wanted the combat experience. They wanted to prove their commitment to this. And I would say that it was probably more than it wasn't a necessity for Russia. They didn't need the manpower, and it might have even been potentially diplomatically and politically more problem than and Russia decided to do it anyway. But there was no demand, there was no commitment there. So I absolutely do not believe that would have been demanded of Israel or of Iran either. With regards to could you toss that question up again?
Oh, sure.
There was something up there. Support for the axis of resistance.
Yeah.
Okay, so it has to be remembered that in just the last year, Russia themselves has openly suggested that they could arm the Houthis with anti-ship weapons in response to the Biden administration lobbying. Now, this is another thing that we haven't talked about, is how that largely the so-called axis of resistance, right? Iran's pro-Shia groups throughout the Middle East that Iran supports, they were a no-show in this. They might as well not have been there. I know the Houthis, the Ansar Allah, fired a few missiles in the direction of Israel through this, but obviously they had been mauled by months of U.S. and Israeli and British strikes on them, and their capability. They survived, which is great, and the U.S. eventually said this is too expensive, wasting too many air defense interceptors and strike missiles, and we're playing whack-a-mole here is pointless, and they just declared victory and sent their ships away out of range. But that being said, I think it obvious that the Houthis' offensive capabilities took a beating during that, right? Which is still, a credit to them for enduring, assaults by the U.S. and Israel and not having it dent their sentiments, their morale, their capabilities, their societal cohesion, whatever, and they still made an attempt. But did you hear anything from Hezbollah during this? Did you hear? I mean, Hamas is just fighting for Gazan survival still.
Right.
I didn't hear anything from Kataib Hezbollah over the course of this. Maybe I heard one mortar fired somewhere in Iraq at direction of a U.S. base. This is because prior to this attack, and I'm sure it was intended this way, that Israel went after each one of the axis of resistance in turn. And if they didn't destroy them, they gave them a good beating that took them a long time to recover from. And I have to say that my impression is that under the President Pezeshkian, Iran did very little to lift a finger to help each one of them when Israel was going after them. So I don't think the question is Russia worried politically about Iran's support of the axis of resistance? I think a more pointed question is, what is the real level of the current Iranian government's support for their own axis of resistance?
Iran, I think what we've seen, especially in this latest 12-day, hostilities, the war waged against them, was that Iran is fiercely sovereign. I mean, Pezeshkian and the top officials, people always criticize them, but even at the ranks, it seems like, of their military, they're like fiercely sovereign, like so fiercely sovereign, independent that maybe some would criticize too sovereign, too independent, too averse to cooperating with Russia. They really want to rely on indigenous capabilities. This was something that was almost like 10 toes down kind of statements coming out of Iran during this. So there's also this. There's also the how the approach is militarily, politically to these problems.
It's absolutely understandable. Again, Iran has a millennia-long history of civilization, wanting to maintain their sovereignty and independence and relying on their own capabilities is in a way commendable, and at the same time has obviously been taken to a degree where it caused severe damage to Iran in a military confrontation with the West, and has obviously been taken too far. Their prickliness, their pride, their mistrust of others nearly led to a fatal conceit. And like I said, Russia and China and Iran, it's not just a problem with Iran, right? Russia, China, and Iran need to find a way to more fully trust and integrate with the others. Yes, that is going to mean a certain degree of sacrifice of sovereignty. That is true of any institution, whether we're talking BRICS plus to a very limited degree, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization also limited, but NATO. Look how much sovereignty European countries give up to the United States and NATO. At least there is a more level, a more even playing field between Russia and China and Iran than, say, between the United States and, I don't know, Belgium, for instance. So there is less of a degree of sovereignty. That is a trade-off, and of any type of military or broader political alliance. And again, if you want to die on the horse, the proud hill of sovereignty and independence to an extreme degree, that's fine. I mean, there is a commendable sentiment there, but I think strictly in pragmatic, realist, strategic terms, it has already been taken too far, and that the Iranian government needs to make a reassessment and find ways that they can cooperate and integrate to a much higher degree with Russia and China. And again, Russia and China have they should be learning the same lessons from this.
I think one, for the axis of resistance in particular, I feel like we've seen Iran take this posture over and over again, and we should be believing them when they say that they are not directly creating and sponsoring and essentially forming these organizations and resistance formations, that they are truly, they give support, but they have said over and over again that no, Ansar Allah, Hamas, whatever it is, they're relying a lot on their own indigenous capabilities, maybe. And so that, I think, is Hezbollah. It's always been the truth. And then that, I think, also speaks to how much can Iran really do to bolster them, but also that all of them kind of understand, and I think they've been understanding from the very beginning, that they are in a years-long, maybe decades-long war of attrition that is going to, who knows where it goes, but that is what they are essentially gambling on, maybe without any other choice in the matter.
So first of all, in terms of proxies, I think, let's take Hezbollah. They quite obviously developed in response, in Lebanon to Israeli on their own. And yes, Iran gave them support, but Iran did not create Hezbollah to the same extent, if we're talking quote unquote proxies, that the U.S. created an anti-Russian putsch regime in Ukraine, right? If we want to make proxy comparisons there. I think that under the current government of Pezeshkian, that, and after joining BRICS Plus and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that the Iranian government has made the decision itself to draw a degree of political and military remove between themselves and the axis of resistance. I think they made that decision. We can talk about whether it's the right or the wrong decision, but
Right.
I know that I've heard people making the argument from within Iranian academic and government sources. There is an ongoing conversation is, why are we sacrificing ourselves, our interests, making enemies, trying to save or even be a gadfly in the process of the, against the Israeli genocide of Palestinians, when all of the Arab countries in the Middle East aren't lifting a finger? And that I don't see as any degree of lack of sympathy or change in ideological orientation from Iran, simply a more realist, pragmatic, and cold-blooded assessment. I've said it on my own channel. I'll say it here. It's a black pill that a lot of people don't want to hear. But the Palestinians are a doomed people. The Israelis are bent on genocide and ethnic cleansing and the forging of a greater Israel. The United States has been quietly complicit in this slow-moving policy for decades. But now under the Trump administration and somewhat under the Biden administration as well, or the Blinken-Sullivan administration, this has been accelerated and greenlit to an absolutely unimaginable. Trump talking about, once all the people are gone, turning it into a vacation, Gaza into a vacation resort. And there is no power on this earth at this time, not Russia, not China, not Ansar Allah, and not Iran, that can save the Palestinian people. The US and Israel are both nuclear powers. They both have escalation dominance. Russia and China do not have the military power to geopolitically power project into the Middle East to save the Palestinians. They politically support them. They recognize Palestine as a state. They will condemn the US, but ultimately the Palestinians people in the fate of the US president, and the US president, who, I mean, whatever, it doesn't make any difference whether it's Trump or Biden or whatever else. The US course is set. The Palestinian people are going to end up being a nomadic people, much like, ironically, the Jews themselves once were. Not only will they not have a state, they will not have a homeland. And it seems inevitable at this point. It's happening before our eyes, and people don't want to recognize that fact yet. I think there is probably a reluctant but grudging and cold-blooded calculation being realized in factions within the Iranian government as well, that it's a losing cause. And if you want to fight a losing cause, I don't have a problem with that. I believe in fighting for lost causes. But when you're in charge of the national interests of a state, you have to make some cold-blooded and hard decisions. And I think that decision is being made in more countries than just Iran at this point. And again, that's a black pill that a lot of people don't want to hear.
I can't imagine these debates are not had within Iran's political system, only because, there are many, I would assume, in Iran, and I think I fall on this, that, Palestine is a key question. It's it's about national liberation. You got to stand up for the people. It's an effort worth fighting for. It's one that
might ideological argument.
Yeah, it might not be.
Not a national interests argument.
Right, exactly. It might be decades down the line, but a lot of people, even now a lot of people around the world, see this as an existential and a key question for a whole lot of things. But then there's, of course, as you said, Mark, there's how about the right now? How do we maneuver this right now? It's all very difficult. And I think the same goes with the Russia, China, Iran partnership too, because, I think one of the things that I'm always watching out for is how deep can this partnership get before a crisis? Because it's difficult to just turn on anything during a crisis. It's military partnership, cooperation alliance. These things do not just speed up when a crisis happens. It is really key, I believe, that any kind of hesitancy on any of the sides be worked out, because eventually, I think all of them should be very well aware, the U.S., Israel, the U.S. and its vassals, whatever, they're not afraid to create a crisis in rapid fashion, regardless of whether it'll go well for them or not.
Yeah,
that's not
whether
even
it makes
a
strategic sense or not. Yeah.
No.
We see two
So,
of them right now. We're in
yeah.
two of those crises, and right now Russia and China and Iran have done a fairly commendable job of stumbling through them. But again,
Right.
they need to increase their coordination and integration in dealing with